My stepson accused me of inappropriate behavior, so I showed everyone the recordings of him planning the lie. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. The whole situation started about 2 years ago when I married my wife, and suddenly I became a stepdad to her 16-year-old son. Let me tell you, blended families are no joke, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I said those wedding vows. From day one, this kid made it clear he didn't want me around. I get it, honestly I do. His parents had been divorced for 5 years, and he probably held on to some hope they'd get back together. Then here comes this random guy swooping in and marrying his mom. But I tried everything to connect with him, and I mean everything. I bought him video games, took him to basketball games, even learned to skateboard at 38 years old because that's what he was into. The kid would just stare at me with this blank expression, like I was some kind of alien speaking a foreign language. His mom kept telling me to give it time, that he'd come around eventually. The first red flag should have been when he started telling his friends at school that I was weird around him. Nothing specific, just that I made him uncomfortable. His mom brushed it off as typical teenage attitude, but something in my gut told me to be extra careful. I started making sure I was never alone with him, always keeping doors open when we were in the same room. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working from home, had a conference call in my office, when I heard voices coming from his room. The walls in our house are pretty thin, and I could hear him talking to someone on the phone. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then I caught fragments of what he was saying. He was talking about how he could get me out of the picture permanently. I thought maybe he was just venting to a friend, you know how teenagers can be dramatic. But then I heard him say something about making up a story that would destroy my reputation and probably land me in prison. My blood ran cold. I quietly moved closer to his door, and what I heard next made me feel sick to my stomach. He was discussing specific details about how he would claim I had been inappropriate with him. He was talking about what he would say happened, when he would say it happened, and how he would make sure there were no witnesses around to contradict his story. The worst part was hearing him laugh while he was planning this. Like it was some kind of game to him. He kept saying how everyone would believe him because he was just a kid, and adults always take the kid's side in these situations. He wasn't wrong about that, and he knew it. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Part of me wanted to burst through that door and confront him right then and there. But another part of me, the smarter part, told me to document everything. So I went back to my office and grabbed my phone. I started recording every conversation I could catch. Not just the phone calls, but also when his friends came over and they would talk about their plan. Yes, you heard that right, his friends were in on it too. Apparently, they thought it would be hilarious to watch my life implode. Over the next few weeks, I collected hours of recordings. They discussed everything from the timing of when he would make the accusation to how he would act traumatized when questioned about it. They even practiced different scenarios, like what he would say if investigators asked specific questions. The most chilling recording was when one of his friends asked if he felt bad about potentially ruining an innocent person's life. His response was that I wasn't innocent because I had stolen his mom away from his dad. In his twisted logic, this was justified revenge for breaking up his family, even though his parents had been divorced for years before I even met his mom. Meanwhile, I was walking on eggshells around the house. I couldn't tell my wife what I had discovered because I knew she would never believe me. Her son was her whole world, and she would have thought I was making it up to turn her against him. I also couldn't just pack up and leave without explaining why, which would have raised too many questions. The stress was eating me alive. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Every time he walked into a room, I would tense up, wondering if today was the day he would execute his plan. I even started working late at the office, just to avoid being home. Then came the night that almost broke me. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich when he walked in. He looked at me with this cold smile and said he hoped I was enjoying my last few days of freedom. He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. He was ready to make his move. I asked him what he meant by that, trying to keep my voice steady. He just shrugged and said I would find out soon enough. Then he grabbed a soda from the fridge and walked away, leaving me standing there with my hands shaking. I knew I was running out of time. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I took the day off work and drove to a lawyer's office. I brought all my recordings with me, every single one. The lawyer listened to everything, and I watched his expression change from skeptical to shocked to disgusted. He told me that what I had was solid evidence of conspiracy to file a false police report, but he also warned me that the situation was incredibly delicate. If I handled it wrong, it could still blow up in my face. We discussed different strategies for how to approach the situation. The lawyer suggested that I should wait for the accusation to be made and then present the evidence, but I couldn't stomach the idea of letting this play out. Even if I was eventually vindicated, the damage to my reputation would be irreversible. People would always wonder if there was some truth to the accusations. Instead, we decided on a preemptive approach. The lawyer would contact the appropriate authorities and present the evidence before any false allegations were made. This way, if the kid did try to follow through with his plan, law enforcement would already know it was fabricated. But first, I had to tell my wife. This was the conversation I had been dreading for weeks. I waited until her son was at school, then sat her down in our living room. I started by playing one of the recordings where he was discussing his plan in detail. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. First came denial. She said the recording must be fake or taken out of context. Then came anger. She accused me of spying on her son and violating his privacy. Finally came the tears when she realized the implications of what she was hearing. We spent the entire day going through all the recordings together. I watched her heart break as she heard her son laughing about destroying my life. She kept saying she didn't know how he could have become so calculating and cruel. The worst part was when she heard him talking about how stupid his mom was for marrying me. By evening, she was a completely different person. The woman who had been defending her son that morning was now talking about sending him to live with his father. She felt betrayed not just by his plan to hurt me, but by the way he had been manipulating her emotions for months. The next day, we both went to the lawyer's office. My wife listened as he explained our legal options and the potential consequences for her son. She was torn between protecting him and doing what was right. Ultimately, she agreed that we needed to involve the authorities before he could hurt anyone else. The lawyer contacted the local police department and arranged a meeting. We brought all the recordings and provided a detailed timeline of events. The detective assigned to the case was a veteran who had seen plenty of false accusations over the years. He listened to everything and agreed that we had a strong case. But then came the twist I never saw coming. The detective told us that this wasn't the first time they had encountered this particular group of teenagers. Apparently, my stepson and his friends had been involved in similar schemes before. They had successfully gotten 2 other men in our neighborhood investigated for false accusations. One of those men had been a youth coach who ended up losing his job and moving out of state, even though the charges were eventually dropped. The other was a substitute teacher who had his life turned upside down for 6 months before the truth came out. These kids had been ruining lives for sport, and nobody had connected the dots until now. The detective explained that they had been building a case against this group for months, but they needed more evidence. My recordings were the missing piece they needed to prove a pattern of behavior. Suddenly, I wasn't just a potential victim, I was a key witness in a much larger investigation. Over the next few weeks, the police conducted interviews with the previous victims and gathered additional evidence. They discovered that my stepson had been the ringleader of this group, coaching other kids on how to make false accusations seem believable. It was like a twisted mentoring program for destroying innocent people's lives. The authorities decided to set up a sting operation. They would let my stepson think his plan was working, then catch him in the act of making false statements. I was terrified about this approach because it meant the accusation would actually be made, but the detective assured me that I would be protected throughout the process. The day finally came when my stepson decided to execute his plan. He went to the school counselor and claimed that I had been inappropriate with him. The counselor, following proper protocol, contacted the authorities immediately. But instead of being arrested, I was contacted by the detective who had been expecting this call. Within hours, my stepson found himself in an interview room at the police station. He had no idea that his plan had been discovered weeks earlier. The detective let him tell his fabricated story in detail, asking follow-up questions that allowed him to dig himself deeper into the lie. Then came the moment that will stay with me forever. The detective played one of the recordings where my stepson was discussing how he would handle police questioning. The kid's face went completely white as he heard his own voice, describing the exact lies he had just told. The detective then played recording after recording, showing how my stepson had planned every detail of his false accusation. By the end of the interview, the kid was crying and begging them not to tell his mom what he had done. He had no idea that she already knew everything. My stepson and two of his friends were arrested that day. The charges included conspiracy to file false police reports, defamation, and harassment. Because of their ages, they were processed through the juvenile system, but the charges were serious enough that they faced real consequences. The story didn't end there, though. Word spread quickly through our small town about what had happened. Parents were horrified to learn that their teenagers had been involved in such a calculated scheme. Several families moved away because they couldn't handle the shame and embarrassment. My stepson's biological father refused to take him in, saying he didn't want that kind of trouble in his house. The kid ended up in a group home for troubled teens while awaiting his court date. My wife was devastated by how everything had unfolded, but she agreed that her son needed professional help that she couldn't provide. The court case took several months to resolve. During that time, I learned more details about the extent of their scheme. They had been targeting men in positions of authority or trust, knowing that accusations against such people would be taken seriously. Coaches, teachers, stepfathers, anyone who worked with or lived with teenagers was a potential target. The most disturbing revelation was that they had been keeping score. They had a notebook where they tracked their successes, men whose lives they had disrupted or destroyed. My stepson had been trying to get the highest score among his friends, and taking down a stepfather would have earned him major points in their twisted game. In the end, my stepson was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile detention facility, followed by 3 years of probation. His friends received lighter sentences because they weren't considered the main orchestrators. All 3 were required to undergo psychological evaluation and counseling. The other victims in our neighborhood finally got some closure. The youth coach was able to get his job back, and the substitute teacher received a formal apology from the school district. Both men had been living under a cloud of suspicion for months, not knowing why their lives had been turned upside down. As for my marriage, it survived, but it was forever changed. My wife struggled with guilt over not seeing the signs of her son's behavior earlier. She blamed herself for raising someone capable of such cruelty. We went to counseling together to work through the trauma of the experience. The hardest part was accepting that the sweet little boy my wife remembered was gone, replaced by someone who was capable of calculated manipulation and cruelty. She had to grieve the loss of the son she thought she knew, while coming to terms with who he really was. My stepson served his full sentence and was released when he turned 18. He never apologized to me or to the other men he had targeted. According to his probation officer, he showed no remorse for his actions and continued to blame others for his situation. He tried to contact his mother a few times after his release, but she refused to see him. She said she couldn't trust him anymore and was afraid of what he might do if he felt cornered again. It broke her heart to cut ties with her only child, but she felt it was necessary for our safety. The experience taught me that evil can come in the most unexpected packages. A 16-year-old kid with a charming smile and good grades was capable of systematic destruction of innocent lives. It made me question how well we really know the people closest to us. I also learned the importance of trusting my instincts. From the beginning, something felt off about my stepson's behavior toward me. I should have documented everything from day one instead of trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes being paranoid is actually being smart. The recordings I made saved my life in more ways than one. Without them, I would have been just another man falsely accused with no way to prove his innocence. The system is designed to protect children, which is good, but it also means that false accusations can destroy lives before the truth comes out. Looking back, I realized that my stepson's plan almost worked perfectly. If I hadn't overheard him discussing it, if I hadn't recorded everything, if I hadn't gone to the authorities first, I would be writing this from prison or living as a registered offender. The thought still gives me nightmares. My wife and I eventually moved to a different state to start fresh. We couldn't handle the constant stares and whispers in our old neighborhood. Even though I had been vindicated, some people still wondered if there was more to the story. That's the thing about false accusations. They leave permanent stains that never fully wash away. We changed our names and started over completely. I found a new job, my wife started a small business, and we tried to rebuild our lives. It took years before we felt safe enough to let our guard down and trust people again. The paranoia was overwhelming at times. Even now, 3 years later, I still have moments where I wonder if I handled everything correctly. Could I have saved my stepson if I had approached the situation differently? Could I have prevented him from destroying other lives? The guilt is something I carry with me every day. But then I remember the recordings of him laughing while planning to send me to prison for something I didn't do. I remember the notebook where he kept score of the lives he had ruined. I remember the complete lack of remorse he showed throughout the entire process. Some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed. The whole experience changed my perspective on life in fundamental ways. I used to believe that most people were basically good, that even troubled kids could be reached with enough love and patience. Now I know that some people are capable of pure evil, regardless of their age or circumstances. I also learned that the justice system, while imperfect, can work when you have solid evidence. The recordings I made were the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. They were the difference between losing everything and keeping my freedom. My advice to anyone in a similar situation is simple: trust your instincts and document everything. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore red flags because you want to believe the best about people. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who look like victims. The story of my stepson is a cautionary tale about the power of false accusations and the importance of protecting yourself. It's also a reminder that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones most capable of betraying us. In the end, I survived because I listened to my gut and took action before it was too late.